Hey everybody, and welcome to another new episode of Time Extend. My name is Adam Ismail, and joining me today is...
Brendan Rorison, but we also have our second guest in the Racing Genre Legends series, Paul Rustchynsky, who you might know as Rushy. Rushy, how's it going?
Hey guys, I'm doing great, thanks.
Racing game fans might know you for being pretty prolific on Twitter, getting engaged with the photo community and racing games, and your impressive resume, which includes the likes of WRC, Motorstorm, Drive Club, and Onrush. And Adam, we're so excited to have him here on.
Absolutely, we couldn't ask for another, great guest, a better guest for Racing Genre Legends, and both Brendan and I are huge fans of some of your work, and we are excited to ask you lots of questions about things that you've probably forgotten about 15 years ago.
It can be difficult recalling everything, but I'll do my best.
Fantastic, and then thanks for joining us tonight. I am in the Northeast in the U.S. and it is 6:30 p.m. and where both of you are, it is almost midnight. So the beauties of time difference, always rearing their ugly head here at Time Extend, but we make do. Yeah, we'll just get into it then. And the way we like to start these conversations, a little bit of an icebreaker, which nobody really likes icebreakers, but we do it anyway because it's a fun place to start. Is I'm going to ask you, Paul, to give us one non-racing game related fact about yourself that you think is fun or interesting or people might not know about or whatever you care to share.
One non-racing game related fact about me? That's a challenging one because pretty much my entire career is racing related. I guess there is one game I think barely anybody knows that I used to work on. This was before my time at Evolution, where I was working on Pool Shark 2 of all games. So it's still a sports game, so it's still a little bit crossover, but that was my kind of, I don't know, my venture outside of the racing genre, because even before that I worked in IndyCar racing, another racing title, so that was my one adventure outside of the genre. But it's just challenging really. I've kind of just fallen into racing games. It was always one of those things where racing games were a passion of mine as a player, but I just happened to every job I go into was pretty much racing game after racing game.
That sounds like a dream, really. I mean, but do you consider yourself an enthusiast as well?
So I have to ask then, the pool sharks, are we talking like billiards or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's pool. The studio I was at, they specialised in snooker games.
Right.
I think they were called Blade Interactive, I think, at the time. And they'd done like I don't know how many dozen snooker games in the past, and obviously they'd done Pool Shark 1, and I got involved on the sequel, and it was a fun little project. We were a tiny little team, about 10 or 12 people. And, I wouldn't say I was a fan of snooker or pool necessarily, but it's one of those things that, having worked in the game, I got into it a lot more. And it was a fun project. It was a short diversion, let's say, because that was literally just like 6 to 9 months. That was a very short project before I just dive straight back into racing.
That was going to be my next question was, are you very good at snooker? Are you like a professional, semi-pro snooker player?
Hell no. At Evo, we had a break room and we had a pool table, and inside there we did tournaments and championships, and I don't even think I got to the quarterfinals of any sort of knockout. So I'm pretty terrible. I mean, you can beat me at the pool any day. Oh god, I'll stick to him. I wouldn't say I'm a terrible sports person, but pool is definitely not one of my strengths.
Well, after this podcast, you're saying then I should invite you to a game of mini-clip multiplayer pool. Is that it, Rushy?
I might just be hustling you. You never know.
It's true. My preferred pool game was always Super Monkey Ball 2's minigame pool. That was a lot of fun.
That whole game was so much fun.
Yeah. Great. So, but we're not here to talk about Super Monkey Ball, even though I think that would be a great second podcast for the three of us to do. We are here to talk about you, Paul, and your great history developing lots of these awesome racing games. So, you kind of touched on how you got your start in game development a little bit with the Pool Shark story there, but I think where it all kicks off really is Evolution Studios, correct? So how'd that begin?
Well, that's where it kicked off really, because obviously before that, with IndyCar racing and Pool Shark, I was in QA at the time, but it was one of those situations where with Evolution, I made some contacts. Very fortunately, it was actually back when I was working on the IndyCar race in 2005. I was working with Dave Wilson and Ollie Wright, who were two fantastic guys who went to Evolution Studios, and they gave me a recommendation, and so I went for the interview. And somehow they gave me the job because I had no experience as a designer. I just worked in the QA for a couple of years, and it was just off the recommendation of those guys that I got the job. And that was my first design gig, where I got the opportunity to jump straight on board and start working on WRC Rally Evolved.
I was playing a little bit of Rally Evolved before this show, and as I recently wrote a story on GT Planet kind of about WRC games and lamented the fact that Rally Evolved didn't come out in the US. So when I was playing it, I was like, it was like a whole aspect of the WRC franchise that was kind of very foreign to me. But I really enjoyed my time with it. And so you joined with Rally Evolve. What was your capacity then when you were working on that game?
I was a designer. Designer with no experience, so I was kind of thrown right in the deep end. It was a really fun job because I was given the responsibility to design the whole front end, so the whole UI, user experience. Obviously, I didn't do any of the visuals. I'm not an artist. I just kind of put together the whole flow. I rigged all the AI for all the Super Rallycross stages where you've got 4 cars and track racing against one another. I tuned all the difficulty and did a lot of work on kind of handling as well. I spent a lot of time with kind of the physics guy, who's Roderick Kennedy at the time, and he's kind of one of these genius type guys. And I spent, I think, at least 6 months locked in a little room with him. I was sat in the steering wheel. I was saying, tweak this, tweak that, and he'd just change a few numbers behind me. And then before I knew it, the handling was 10 steps better than it was like half an hour ago. It was really fun and enlightening experience because, as I said, I've never done anything like that prior to that job. I've just learned so much on the job. Very little experience. I'd been to uni doing a games design course, obviously worked in QA, but it's nothing like the real thing. So it was a fantastic opportunity that they gave me, the trust to kind of throw me in the deep end. And I know it was an established franchise, and working on the 5th in the series is going to be easier than starting from scratch. But that was a really fun job, that, and that kind of got my teeth into racing games, and that kind of kicked on my career from there, really.
Seems like an interesting situation where you get that incredible first opportunity and you're thrown right in the deep end, like you're saying, but also working on an established franchise. Are you kind of grateful almost that there was a framework for those WRC games that you could kind of get a vibe for, or was it kind of difficult with no experience going straight into that?
No, I think that really helped, having that sort of framework. Because I was quite familiar with the previous WRC titles as a racing game fan, so I played them all, understood them all, and seen how they've changed and evolved over time. So kind of diving into it felt like quite natural, really, because I kind of knew what I wanted to do. Obviously, I wasn't the lead designer at the time. I was working with Simon Barlow, who'd worked on most or all of the previous WRC titles, and he kind of really showed me the ropes and held my hand through a lot of things. And he had a vision for what he wanted the game to be, along with the game director Matt Southern at the time. So yeah, it was actually, even though I was thrown at the deep end, it was lots of really experienced guys helping me out and showing me the ropes, if anything else. Because one of the crazy things about jumping into that team, I think it was about 30 guys working on the project, and the majority of those guys have been working together for a long, long time. I mean, people have been in the industry for way more than a decade, and I've just got my start, really. And so having that sort of experience and that sort of talent around you, it kind of gives you, the energy, the passion, and the support that you need to, to grow as inside the creative industry.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the perfect place to be, to start your career there, with all the people who you were saying working together and an established franchise. Also, Sony being, on top of the world at that time, and you working closely with Sony as part of Evolution Studios into the next generation, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was a interesting kind of shift afterwards. Obviously, I was on WRC 5, and at the time, that was when, the PlayStation, 3 was kind of happening in the background, and there was another smaller team starting to put together ideas for, what we'd be doing on that platform. We knew it was going to be racing. That's what the team specialised in. It was always really a question of, what type of racing? How are we going to change things up? WRC as a franchise, we loved. In that short period of time working on WRC 5, it was one of those games I kind of really fell in love with. But obviously, some of the guys have been working on the game for how many years since the original. But everyone kind of knew that WRC as a sport wasn't really growing, and we wanted to kind of open it up to a much, a bigger worldwide audience, appeal to the Americas and other territories around the world. So we knew we had to do something fresh. And I think with the off-road sort of skill, I think doing some sort of off-road racer was often the natural fit for us. But we had to do something kind of unique, something that, would stand out from the crowd, because there's a ton of racing games. There's a lot of quality out there. So I think one of the key goals for Motorstorm was, what can we do to kind of really give the racing genre a fresh injection of life, especially in the off-road space. And I think that was kind of directed by Martin Kemmerer at the time and Nigel Kershaw, fantastic designers, and they kind of really pushed this idea of this kind of brutal off-road racing in lots of crazy contrasting vehicles, all of which stood the same chance to win the race. So yeah, that was fun, kind of seeing that happen whilst I was working on Rally Evolved, and seeing those guys kind of get their ideas together and start to pull together that pitch, that high-level goal for the game was awesome. And then obviously after WRC Rally Evolved wrapped up, once we shipped that, and then it was a kind of everyone on board Motorstorm, and it kind of really ramped up, because we went from a team of 30 people in WRC Rally Evolved, and then it was kind of felt like the moment I jumped on the team, we doubled in size the next day. we're up to 60 plus, and then before we knew it, I think we almost peaked at like 75 or something on the original Motorstorm. It was a whirlwind of development, that one, working on Motorstorm.
I can think back to when I first saw that game running, and it was probably the retailer or something like that, and I didn't know games could be that beautiful. Like, it seemed at the time like an astonishing technological achievement, and I don't know, I feel like I'm not alone in that. Like, it was not only a lot of fun to play, but it just really was one of the few examples. You know how when a system launches, it's like, well, some of these games are kind of ports of stuff that was in the previous generation. Some of this stuff is just like put onto a new system to kind of get a game out there. Motorstorm really felt like the next big step up, and I can imagine it must have been tremendously exciting.
It was really exciting, but it's also quite a daunting or scary period as well, because we were transitioning from a piece of hardware that we'd worked on for however many years, intimately familiar with the PlayStation 2, and moving on to PlayStation 3 was completely foreign. It was an entirely different beast, of which, the tools and things that you needed as a developer to really kind of get up and running quickly weren't there initially. So it was very challenging. And, up until, I don't know, 9 months, maybe 12 months before the game was due to launch, we're in a situation where we were still playing with, quite primitive looking stages, primitive looking vehicles, not much damage. And, that was kind of like, oh, right, the launch date's rather soon and there's a hell of a lot to do. But we had so many talented guys in the team. I was so fortunate to be surrounded by, some of the best graphics engineers I've, ever worked with, who I consider to be geniuses in the field, and they really kind of pulled it out of the bag. In that very short period of time, that last 6 months in particular, it kind of felt like we built the whole game in that kind of that very short period. And it was thrilling, but also it was one of those times where you realize just how hard games development is. There was some tough times in terms of putting in the effort and the hours to get that game done on time, but it was definitely a project of passion for many people, and we wanted to make sure it had its best chance at launch. And I think we did a pretty good job in the end, given the challenges, circumstances surrounding it.
From my standpoint, I mean, this is the thing, Rushy. I didn't get on too well with the original Motorstorm, funnily enough. I was of the sequel, Pacific Rift, and that was one of the questions I wanted to ask. Like, when I think about the MotorStorm series, it really seemed as if that game properly took off. Like, I always remember I went to my uncle's house who had the PlayStation 3. He didn't care about racing games at all, but he just wouldn't shut up about Pacific Rift. Like, he's constantly talking about like the vibe of the game and the great soundtrack and just all of that. Do you feel as if like Pacific Rift, you took what you learned from like the original game and applied it even further? Because it seemed as if it played slightly more intuitive, and the track design was incredible as well.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Whenever you work on an original game, the sequel is, I don't know, for racing games in particular, you always see that the second game is generally better. And it's one of those things that we had the time to polish, refine, and reflect on what we did on MotorStorm. And if I go back to play MotorStorm right now, you can kind of see where it's rough around the edges in some places. There's difficulty spikes all over the place. There's some bits that are unbalanced, but there's a roughness and readiness to that game which I still love. But as you say, Pacific Rift is a much better game. The courses are better designed, the handling is more refined, the balance between the classes is much better. It's got much more variety. It's got better mechanics inside there in terms of what we did with the boost. It's even got more modes, more multiplayer functionality. It was a very complete experience. And MotorStorm at launch was quite a skinny product, the original game. Obviously, we built upon it. We added in the multiplayer, the time trial, and other elements over time. But obviously, Pacific Rift was the one where I think we delivered on all of our promises, and then we even, I think, went beyond all of that with the DLC that we actually pushed out for that game as well. So yeah, Pacific Rift was, again, I think everyone on the team could be truly proud of as something that we, spent a lot of time and love on, and hopefully we kind of ticked all the boxes and made a lot of the fans pleased. Because I enjoyed working on that one, and that was my first gig as lead designer on that project.
Wow.
So that was particularly kind of a proud moment for me as well, to be able to lead the design of a game as well, and deliver to what I wanted with it.
No, that was the one that really got me into MotorStorm. Like, I had the first one, and I played it, like I said, I had fun with it, but Pacific Rift was the one that, one of those games that you only realize after you've sunk however many hours into it, like, wow, I've been playing this a long time. And then, like, all of a sudden I realized, like, oh, all these songs from the soundtrack are getting stuck in my head. Like, it had the one Nirvana song, Swap Meet. I just absolutely love that. Just, absolute calamity and destruction to that song. It was such a perfect pairing. And I think any racing game that also has a right soundtrack to go with it, it usually sticks in your mind for a longer amount of time. It kind of transcends your memories and just becomes almost like this emotional experience when the music's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
you can thank Alan McDermott for that. He was the kind of orchestrator of the soundtracks for both the original MotorStorm and Pacific Rift. He did a fantastic job of picking just the right music for those two titles.
So I have to ask then, because we're on the topic of, we're talking about Pacific Rift and leading into Apocalypse, and we had an episode, one of our first episodes of Time Extend, we talked about unreleased racing games. And I had heard about this game called Urban Smash that I believe you might know something about. Can you shed light on that?
That's a tricky one, actually. I'm not quite sure how much you can say. Obviously, I can confirm that it was a game that was being worked on at Evolution Studios as a kind of a second project on the side as to, I think it was when we were nearing finishing Pacific Rift. We knew we were going to do a sequel to MotorStorm, do another kind of take on that franchise, but we also wanted to kind of branch out and do something different. So we had a second team starting to work on something, still a racing game, but something quite different as a racing title. And it's just one of those things where I think it showed a lot of promise, but for whatever reason, it didn't quite get off the ground. Some of the prototyping proved that there were some really fun elements, but also problems that still needed solving. And we were getting to the point where I think we were moving on to Apocalypse, and Apocalypse was kind of moving along quite smoothly, really, if anything else. And so Sony was like, well, I think time to put all the effort and focus onto Apocalypse and make that the best game it can be. So it's one of these things where in games development there's often lots of little side projects and spin-offs and things that just don't work out. A lot of time you don't tend to hear about these things. I'm surprised, about Urban Smash. I can't remember whether or not there was any leaks on that, which is why I'm being
Well, there was
what I can say.
what I can tell you is that I read, I think Eurogamer might have had an article on it or something like that, going back to like, it must have been like GDC 2009 or 2010 or something, and they were talking about, somebody presented some sort of animatic pre-rendered thing on Urban Smash that was very rough, and like the nothing was really textured, but just watching kind of double-decker buses and bikes kind of go through buildings and go through plate glass windows and stuff like that. It looked really cool. Yeah,
I remember that one actually. Yeah, because I think we learned a lot on that kind of initial prototype on damage and destruction, which is a lot of the stuff we kind of took into Apocalypse, which was all about obviously destroying cities.
Yeah, that's the one thing I couldn't figure out, was how much of it was Urban Smash just, pretty much the idea for Apocalypse, and then it was always going to be a MotorStorm game, or was it its own thing?
I think it was going to be its own thing. It was definitely going to be a type like a stand on its own 2 feet, and kind of branch out and do something different. I think a third MotorStorm was kind of always on the cards, just because the original MotorStorm was such a big success. Pacific Rift followed that up really well, and there was still a fan base and appetite for more MotorStorm games. So I think that was always going to come. It would have been fantastic, I think, if Urban Smash would have been given the opportunity to be a second project. Evolution might have been much bigger. The studio doing lots of different things by now, but obviously, this is how things work out. I mean, I think there was another project, which I'm not going to name, which had a similar sort of fate. I think that was after Apocalypse, when we were looking to to build a racing game, but also at the same time there was another little team, and they were prototyping another idea. And again, it was one of those situations where the prototype showed lots of promise, but Drive Club was kind of building momentum at the time, and I think Sony wanted to put all the emphasis and focus on that product to make it as good as possible. So again, projects just don't always get off the ground, and it's a shame, but it's one of those things you got to look at the business realities and all these sort of factors that go into making a decision as to what games do go forward and which don't.
I mean, on that note, then to dial it back slightly, you were saying like Apocalypse, the development cycle was smooth, and you guys obviously felt good about that one. Was it a bit of a annoyance or gutter that the Japanese earthquakes kind of delayed the game quite a bit? Did you feel as if that actually influenced how it was going to perform sales-wise? Was it one of those moments you were just like, the timing couldn't have been more coincidental?
I mean, obviously you've got to think about the events that took place and how serious that was, and the loss of life. And so, the timing obviously of Apocalypse was, hugely unfortunate, and couldn't have been worse from a product perspective, let's say. Because the kind of build up to launch, the timing of that, and the press that goes around it is hugely important to make a game successful. And given the circumstances as to what happened, a lot of the marketing and the timing of everything had to be changed, and it no doubt had an impact on the game's success, which was hugely frustrating from a creative point of view. But when you put it into perspective as to what happened, it's one of those things that just had to be done.
Of course, I understand that. It was pretty much unprecedented.
Yeah, because I was on the kind of press build-up or the press tour of, and we were obviously promoting the game, and I had a message super early from Mike Humphries, one of the other designers on the project, super early in the morning, and have you seen the news? And I'm like, what news? And they sent me a link to what had happened, and it was like, oh my, it was,
wow.
Yeah, it was one of those moments that kind of, I just sat in the hotel room at the time for like half an hour, just trying to come to terms as to what has happened, and that was one of the low moments, let's say, in kind of in my career at the time. That was because it was kind of like we were on a high, almost kind of getting ready to launch, super pleased with the game, and then obviously it all kind of had to really kind of take a back seat, and it was the right decision by Sony, what they did. But yeah, it did mean that Apocalypse wasn't the success it could have been.
Was the plan always like at the time to have that trilogy of MotorStorm games, or was there still a bit of belief that there maybe could be a fourth game? Do you feel as if Apocalypse had performed slightly better, you would have carried that franchise to the PS4, or else was it very much? You talked about the fact there was the side project and Drive Club. Was it always the case that MotorStorm was going to be the PlayStation 3's flagship franchise before Evo moved on?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it could have continued. I think that amongst the people in the studio, I think there were enough really cool ideas that could have spawned, a fourth title. Technically it wouldn't have been a fourth, because obviously there was Arctic Edge and there was RC, there was other spin-offs and stuff. But in terms of the true series titles, the fourth one, I think that could have happened, but only if Apocalypse would have been a success. But on the counterpoint to that, I think there were also people in the studio who've worked on MotorStorm for quite a few years. I think it was 2006 to 2012, something like that. And there were people in the studio who wanted a fresh start, wanted to do something different, and people wanted to get back to real racing. People who loved working in WRC and wanted to go back to working on real cars. So there were lots of different people in the studio with different passions, pushing for different things, and but ultimately it comes down to business decisions. And Apocalypse wasn't the big success it could or should have been, and I think Sony wanted to look at, to do different projects with us, and we had a couple of games. Obviously, one I mentioned that didn't go forwards, but obviously Drive Club was one they really kind of, bit into and liked the idea of. So that was the one we kind of pushed forward on.
Yeah, so that explains kind of where Drive Club came from, because I remember being surprised when I watched the PS3 reveal. I think it was early in 2013 or something like that when Sony had their event. I think it was Matt walked out and introduced Drive Club, and I was amazed that Evolution Studios' new project was not another MotorStorm, or not something more destructive off-road, Yeah,
I think it surprised a lot of people, but it was kind of coming back to our roots. The WRC games were a simulation. We took a real life sport and engineered that on the PlayStation 2, and I think faithfully recreated it. And I think that's something we knew we could do, and it's a challenge we wanted to kind of take to the next generation. Because obviously the PlayStation 4 is a piece of hardware we were hugely excited about, because Sony learned so much from the launch of the PlayStation 3 in terms of not only the hardware, the tools, the support. That was a bit of a joy to work on in comparison, and it was something that we really felt we could make some stunning visuals, some amazing audio to create a fantastic driving experience on.
Yeah, I've heard so many things about from various developers about how the PS3 was, shall we say, not the easiest system to work on, and the PS4 was a good sight better in that regard.
Oh yeah, it's worlds apart, absolutely worlds apart. I mean, it's one of those things where I mentioned before back in MotorStorm, those final 6 months, I think 90% of the development was done within that time, because that was the only real point in its development where we had all the final tools and the hardware and the things that we needed to actually build the game. There was such a long time spent on kind of the PC hardware, which was like prototype, pulling things together, with not really having a full understanding of the SPU architecture. Whereas PlayStation 4, we knew so much in advance. We had access to hardware, documentation, software, everything super early, and the tools were really useful. And they still are. I mean, the PlayStation 4 is still a joy to work with. They've got a lot of things they've just nailed perfectly, in terms of allowing you to debug, analyze performance, and do all the things that just make development easier. Because development is hard. It's a very challenging job, and these sort of things can save a lot of time and effort, whereby you can spend that time and polish. You can make the game a better experience. You don't have to worry about all these little things, and it's just kind of taken care of nowadays. So yeah, it's a pleasure to work in this new environment. I say new, 7 years on now.
I mean, on that note then, it was pretty interesting when the PlayStation 4 was going to launch that Gran Turismo was nowhere to be seen. And because obviously Gran Turismo 6 had launched on the PS3 pretty similarly time frame wise, did you feel as if there was like a good level of even pressure, but just expectancy from Sony's part that Drive Club could take the the kind of first party racing game mantle in the meantime, or even push further than that? Was there a lot of confidence in the project on Sony's part?
Yeah, it was definitely one of the things where we knew where we had to be the kind of premier driving experience on the platform. We knew that Gran Turismo wasn't going to be there, and we also knew that we weren't necessarily going to be competing directly with Gran Turismo either. They were a full-on sim title, and we wanted to do something that's significantly more accessible and social at the time. And we wanted to make the best stab at it, to make it our own unique take on the product. But yeah, I mean, there was pressure from Sony. We needed to make a fantastic launch product. PlayStation 4 at the time wasn't the success it is now. In terms of at launch, nobody really knew how well it was going to go. Obviously, it's turned into a massive success. Now we sold 95 million units. But they wanted strong launch software, and Drive Club was going to be one of those. So they needed quality games to be able to sell the system and show the capabilities of what the hardware could do. So yeah, there was pressure there. And it wasn't the easiest project necessarily, because there was lots of changes behind the scenes in terms of the development staff and the kind of the social back end, let's say, of the game. And so obviously it wasn't a smooth launch, as we all know. But I'm glad how it turned out, obviously.
Yeah, I struggle to ask a question where they go wrong, because I was playing the game last week, and I felt about this way at the time, and I feel the same way about now, that it really is it's one of my favorite racing games I think ever, and definitely of this generation. And I really, really enjoy Drive Club, and it turned out fantastically with all the DLC and everything. But the flip side of that is launched obviously without the multiplayer component working well. And from what you're describing, it sounds like it was like kind of the social back end and everything that was the problem, not so much just like you had the game working from a core fundamentals standpoint, but all of the connectivity aspects were the issue.
Yeah, I would say the actual driving aspect was an area I had utmost kind of confidence in. Our track designers, our handling tuners, physics guys, etc. We knew we had a game that played great. It was just some of the infrastructure which was new to us, really. Obviously, we worked on multiplayer, time trial, and all these sort of connected elements in the past. But we're trying to be ambitious, trying to do something new, trying to do something different. And there were some areas where we probably were short on a little bit of experience, and we made some mistakes. Developers are fallible. We don't get things right first time all the time, as you can see by so many live service games nowadays, where it's kind of exposing some of the challenges of games development, and how hard it is to get it right sometimes. So it was disappointing. I'm just so pleased that we managed to turn it into something that everyone could be proud of.
It's definitely a spectacular turnaround. I mean, I wrote an article for GT Planet just after the Edinburgh track was released, kind of recapping the story. And upon reading it back, it really just showed how great a job Evolution did, because when you think about the post-launch support, the club's personally the best. Like, the amount of content you guys turned around, and the phenomenal dynamic weather as well, and then Drive Club bikes, like the list is pretty much endless. There was always a reason to go back, and even I was obsessed with even the accolades system in the game as well. Just like any time a new manufacturer get added, it was just like, I've got to drive those miles, and not
there was always something to do.
Honestly, the post-launch support then, did Evolution and yourself feel like that was the way it was always going to turn out, or else did you start to even surprise yourself with the quality of the content?
I think we surprised ourselves a little bit, and I think we bit off a little bit more than we could chew, I think, because it was one of those things where we knew the PlayStation 4 and that kind of generation was kind of bringing a new breed of products, where you didn't just put a disc out and that was it. The game's done, move on to the sequel. And we obviously back on Pacific Rift and other titles in the past. We had kind of played around with DLC a little bit here and there, and so when we launched Drive, or I guess prior to that, we planned having a season pass. We wanted to do something which was there to support the game for a long period of time after launch, and we had this idea of making sure we had this kind of monthly rollout of content with new tracks, new cars, new features, new modes, and I think we promised a lot up front on that season pass. And looking back, I would have changed that. I would have delivered less, because it was a challenge to meet all those goals, especially when there's so many things going on in the background. Because when you're working with manufacturers and licensing, if anything changes behind the scenes, you don't get a deal signed, or you don't get the audio captured on a particular car, you don't get the CAD data you want to build the car's interior, any of those little details that go awry means you have to have a fallback plan. So managing that kind of season pass was, a big challenge, and something that as a team we hadn't done kind of live development. You're not working on a product where you've got a couple of years to kind of get it right and a few months to kind of polish those bugs. You're launching patches monthly at a minimum. Sometimes it's 2 to 3 patches a month, and that was crazy initially. We weren't familiar with that sort of kind of frequency of updates, and making sure we had so many checks and balances in place to ensure that every single patch that went out, we didn't break anything. We always wanted to make sure that it was always positive, net positive improvement every single time we made a change, a balancing refinement, or added new content. Didn't knock anything out of whack. So it's a huge amount of fun, combined with that stress. But I think we kind of got into our groove. I think towards the end of the season pass, we had that kind of real confidence in knowing what we were doing, and I think that led on to bikes, and obviously we were still delivering additional DLC on top of that as well. And I think that's one of those things where I could have done for another couple of years, keep building on the game, because it was a fantastic platform that we had, and it would have been awesome to be able to continue just building Drive Club as a universe into something much bigger. But obviously things didn't work out that way.
Yeah, I think it found its groove as a service. I think that's even when as much as I enjoyed, the act of physically playing the game, that's when it really started to click with me. I was like, okay, I understand what this can be, and I fully believe in it. I think a lot of players felt the same way. But as you're working on all this content, as you're doing all this work, and the team's working their tails off to get all this DLC out, and you're hitting at a consistently, great quality, is there this kind of feeling in the back of your mind, like we're putting in all this work, we're throwing our souls into this, but was there a thought that the future of the studio is uncertain, the future of the franchise is uncertain? Was it like you're doing all this great work in the short term, but you're a little bit concerned about the future? Was there any of that?
The only point where I think there was a bit of concern was actually, in those first 6 months after launch, where things weren't going smoothly. I think the moment we kind of fixed the core problems and then started to roll out the content, I think we had a huge amount of confidence then, because we knew the core of the game was great, and it was just the platform then to continue to build upon. And every month we knew we were making a better and better game. So no, I don't think any of us kind of were too worried about it. If anything, it was kind of like we were kind of excited to see where we could take things going forwards. And after bikes got such a good reception and we were so pleased with how that turned out again, we thought, well, there's lots more scope for what we can do in this Drive Club universe. So yeah, it was a surprise when things didn't work out, but that's just the nature of business sometimes.
So what kind of vehicles would you have added after bikes then? You could choose anything.
we had a long list of things. Again, these are sort of things I don't think I can say, but we had a lot of ideas, and I think there was a lot of scope for keeping that kind of the core formula that we'd built fresh by adding in lots of really new and exciting kind of layers to the game and building it out into something where I think could have brought in an even broader audience of racing fans.
One of the things I always think about was when it got revealed that Criterion were toying around with the ideas for like aeroplanes for Burnout Paradise, and it was like, I can't even imagine how that could have worked, but it just goes to show the kind of crazy things you could do to keep the game fresh.
I will say one thing: we never considered any sort of a flying vehicle of any form. There were always 4 or 2, or maybe even 3 wheels in some instances that we were kind of, we wanted to kind of continue with. Yeah, it would have been nice to get back to some off-road stuff as well, but hey ho.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the Wombat was added, that was really cool. Was that for April Fool's Day?
It was April
That
Fool's.
car-
Yes, that was.
Cool.
Yeah, I remember when I had that idea and I kind of pitched it, and there was quite a lot of resistance because people thought that because we were spending all the time and effort to build the vehicles, do the handling, and then to kind of sell it as an April Fool would undermine the work that went into it. But I was like, no, it'd be great publicity for it when people find out it's actually real.
Like, I remember being on the GT Planet forums and people were like, wait, what? Is this actually happening? And the level of detail was incredible. Like, it seemed as if the suspension and everything was modelled like incredibly well. It was probably one of the most elaborate April Fools we've seen in the genre.
Yeah, it probably is. And I think our vehicle guys in particular absolutely love working on that because quite a lot of the same vehicle guys, worked on previous MotorStorm titles, so it's kind of a thrill for them to go back, rebuild one of those vehicles on next gen hardware, and kind of showcase what it could have looked like if we made MotorStorm on PlayStation 4.
You put that thought in everyone's minds as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really funny. I remember after they came out with the communities aspect of the PlayStation Network, released it on PS4, I remember popping into the Drive Club one, and even a good chunk of Drive Club fans were like, where's our new MotorStorm? So I almost felt like I read that as like kind of tossing them a little crumb of something, like, here you go.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, there was a little bit of strategy in there from my angle to try and look, we've put this vehicle into the game and it's hugely popular, and I can go back to the management team and go, look, everyone's racing with the Wombat Typhoon. They love it. There's an appetite for this to build a new MotorStorm or something. Then maybe it's something that they could have rolled with and pushed forward, but it's a challenging one. It's trying to pitch ideas for titles that kind of fallen by the wayside and bring them back alive, and it was maybe a bit too soon after Apocalypse as well, potentially, even though it felt like quite a long time in terms of those kind of short lifespans of consoles. It's not really that big a difference. 4 or 5 years, when you look at like big reboots and HD remakes and all those sort of things, you're looking at generally longer than that.
So that covers the Drive Club pretty well, and we talked about MotorStorm, and obviously you and your team go through another huge change. Evolution closes, and then Codemasters just comes to the rescue, right? Yeah, so I guess what was that like? That changeover.
What an interesting transition, let's say. It's one of those things where when we found out that things were going to change at Evolution, and we're going to have the doors closed, there was a lot of panic, but we were very fortunate with some support in the background, and Nick Hocking being a big help into engineering this deal to put us in a position where we could actually just not roll immediately into, but very shortly after we closed, we were able to kind of almost reopen with 99% of the same guys, and been given this opportunity by Codemasters to go and build a racing game of our choice. Yeah,
and Onrush was when I first heard about it. Again, it was another instance where I feel like the Evolution team was giving me something I wasn't expecting, but was intrigued. Where did the idea for that game come from? Was it something that you kind of sat down with Codemasters or people from Codemasters and was like, we'd like to do this, we would too? Or had you been ruminating about that for a while?
No, it was actually an idea that after Evolution had closed, it was myself, Richard Weaver, who was the creative director, and Jimmy Brayshaw, assistant game director on the project. We were down the pub, technically unemployed at that time, and we were just kind of, having a beer and trying to, get some creative ideas flowing. And the idea, just kind of, we were all, I wouldn't say tired of racing games, but we worked on so many traditional racing games for quite a long time. Motorstorm to us kind of became traditional in some respects, even though it was quite different at the time. And we wanted to kind of break outside our comfort zone, do something different. With the knowledge that what we're going to do next, we're probably not going to have the same sort of budgets or timeframes or team sizes and all these sort of things to develop. A racing game that can go head to head with, Forza or games like that. So we wanted to make sure we could build something that was completely unique, not seen in the racing genre before, something that could stand in its own 2 feet and say, this hasn't been done. And also, try and bring in that wider audience. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't just for racing fans. Obviously, we wanted to appeal to racing fans, and I hope it did. But we also want to make sure we can bring in those people who play Overwatch or Rocket League or FIFA, and bringing that more casual audience as well to maybe bite their teeth in racing games a little bit, and then hopefully enjoy the rest of the genre as well.
It's a very interesting story to hear how Onrush actually came about, because you must have expected that there would be some people just like, why isn't this Motorstorm, even from the very first time you showed off the game?
Oh yeah, it's one of those things that we would have been in a very, you've got to be very careful when you're, when you're moving. Like, obviously, we moved from Sony and we joined Codemasters, and it would have been a tricky relationship, let's say, if we would have gone and just made up a straight up Motorstorm ripoff, because we left on very good terms with Sony, even though obviously things didn't work out. We still had a vested partnership with them. Obviously, we were going to work with Codemasters, develop on their platform on the PlayStation 4. So it was important to us to keep that strong relationship going forwards, and so they could support us on the platform. And I think it wouldn't have gone down very well if we would have, taken what was essentially their IP, and kind of ripped it off. It's one of those things where the game industry, it's a small place, and you don't want to sour any relationships or cause any friction. So, we knew that, doing something like a Motorstorm ripoff would not have gone down well. So, politically, it would have been a very unwise decision. Even though it would have been fun to kind of work on a Motorstorm style game, we knew that, it could have caused friction, let's say.
Well, that's fair enough, and by the sounds of it, the main players and coming up with Onrush anyway were ready to try something different, so maybe it wasn't a bad thing to have that restriction that you couldn't just make another Motorstorm. And I think Onrush actually benefited from that different kind of thinking, because personally, I'm somebody who is a big advocate for the game. I absolutely loved it. I was one of those people right away, like I even convinced Adam to give it a proper go.
Yeah.
Because
first couple episodes of Time Extender, definitely us every other week saying, go play the beta, go play the game, go try it.
But I can totally understand why, not everyone kind of gets on with it straight away, because it is so different, and I think it requires a little bit of a different mindset from your typical racing game, because obviously we're tipping the racing genre in its head almost at that point, whereby we're saying that if you make a mistake or fall behind or crash, you're put right back in the action. The concept that there isn't a first place, racing ahead isn't necessarily a benefit, and that was very foreign to a lot of people. And I can understand how that could turn off a lot of people, which made it a very challenging game to market. But from my perspective as a creative and and the rest of the team, we had confidence in that the game was a huge amount of fun. So I wasn't too worried about it from that perspective, because I just knew I was making a good game. I was confident in, and I hope that underlying core quality that sits beneath would shine through to to do it well.
It brings up an interesting point, because when I think about Onrush, and Brendan and I think we've talked about this in the past, kind of think back to the old Bizarre Racer Blur that they did for Activision, and just like, definitely aspects of racing games are there, but you're trying to broaden it out. You're trying to maybe create more of a competitive element to broaden the genre. And I wonder, given that Blur had all of this pressure, Bizarre had all this pressure placed on them, from Activision with Blur, and it didn't pan out, and Onrush was difficult to market, do you still believe, even though Onrush was critically acclaimed, we both enjoyed playing it, do you believe that that market actually exists for a racing game that can break down those barriers? Because it seems like almost any time someone tries to do it, it just some aspect of it doesn't get communicated to the audience.
I think it's a challenging one when you're putting the product out at full price. I think it's one of those situations where maybe it might have been better to take a different business strategy, to go free to play, to get more people to get their hands on with the product, to give it a chance. Because I think, it's definitely challenging to bring in that wider audience. How do you get your Rocket League player or your Overwatch players to come and try out a game like Onrush, something that's a racing game from an outsider's perspective, but when you play it, it's something quite different. So I can completely see, where you're coming from there. So would I have done things differently? Yeah, I think I would have made some different decisions, and maybe things might have turned out differently. It's difficult to say, but who knows?
One of the things that really shocked me about the game, and it really shouldn't have based on Drive Club, was how amazingly pretty it could look. Because obviously a lot of the trailers and stuff focused on the chaotic of the game, because that's where all the fun is. But when you're on some of the tracks and the weather effects kick in, and you see the kind of sunrise or sunset, it's absolutely stunning. On the way, Onrush was built on the Ego engine, wasn't it, as well?
It was actually a completely new engine, Onrush, because it was one of those things where we'd learned so much from working on Drive Club. We had that kind of technical knowledge and foundation to take things to the next level, but not be bound by some of the bad decisions we did in the past. So it was actually one of those awesome things for our team to actually have a fresh start, kind of mid-generation. And it was that kind of situation where it was, I think it was led by Ollie Wright and Rich Taylor, some of our senior guys to build a new engine. And we knew straight from the off, how we wanted to construct that and where we could get other benefits and gains for that in such a short period of time. And I think that's one of the main achievements, I think, of that project, if anything else, was that within that short space of 2 years, we started from scratch. Obviously, we had a lot of really fantastic support from Codemasters, but we started from scratch. Built a new game, an original game on a completely new engine, released on time to budget, and all that sort of stuff. And we achieved something that, as you say, I think looked really good. And that's, I think, just because the team we worked so well together. We had so many kind of graphics coders and fantastic artists, all of which have worked together for difficult to say, but quite a lot of them have been working in that same environment for a decade, side by side, and we knew how to get the best out of one another. It was one of the situations where you knew who to go to, you knew who could fix the problem, and there was such a smooth development from that perspective in terms of building the engine, building the tools, and couldn't be prouder of the guys who worked in it and made a fantastic looking game in such a short period of time.
Definitely great of you to point that out, because the turnaround that Onrush was produced in just astounds me. All of the challenges of modern development, coupled with the fact that you're at a new studio, working with a certain degree of new people, even though a lot of your team was there and you've been working with those guys for a while. You do, through all of these experiences, working for these different companies on these very different projects, it seems like you carry a lot with you. It seems like, lessons are definitely learned and there are efficiencies gained there.
Oh, absolutely. I think, as a game industry, we're quite, I think we're still in our infancy in some respects, and we're still learning, how to make games better. I think every single project that we make, and I've only been in the industry for a short time period compared to a lot of people. I think 15 years or so, where people have been in the industry for 30 plus years. We had John Gibson, who worked on, I think, all WRCs, MotorStorms, and he's retired now. He's worked in the industry that long, and so experience, I think, matters. It really does help, especially when you're on such large projects. When you're working with 50 plus, 100 plus sort of teams, I think you need a lot of experienced people in that to kind of keep the engine oiled well and get it running smoothly, because it's so easy to make simple mistakes that can ripple through the entire development process for a big team. I think when you're working with a small team, you can afford a little bit in some respects to make those mistakes, and you can turn things around a little bit quicker. But when you're in kind of a machine where one mistake can impact 50 other people, it can result in days of downtime or hundreds of thousands of pounds of development budget just being thrown away. So it's really important, I think, to have those kind of key leads and people within your team to make sure that when you're working on that scale, things run smoothly, because it's so easy for things to trip up. And I've been there in the past where things have gone wrong and it's very hard to recover. So having those experienced people around you to make things just kind of roll smoothly was a pleasure on Rush. After that,
you're in kind of a interesting situation again, with Codemasters Evo being shut down. Imagine there was a bit of deja vu there.
It's one of those, I can't really talk much about the transition, unfortunately, but yeah, I mean, it's I've been in the industry long enough to realize that it's a business and how things are run, and it's one of those unfortunate things, and that I don't think there's enough job security within the industry as a whole. I was very fortunate to be at Sony for more than a decade, which I think, if you look at a lot of people's careers, you don't get the opportunity to stay at one games development studio for that long. So I've been very fortunate in that respect. But I think it's also important that you network and you kind of build relationship with people across the industry, because even though it might look like I'm head down at Evo or Codemasters, whatever, it's a small world, really. There isn't millions of developers making games, and I think we all within the racing genre anyway, there's a lot of people who know one another, and I was always confident that whatever happened, I'd have somewhere to go to and continue making racing games or making other exciting products. So whilst it wasn't an ideal experience, let's say, I'm very happy with how things have turned out.
I mean, do you feel as if when the story kind of got broke by Eurogamer, pretty much, they were one of the first, do you feel as if that type of coverage helps kind of point out how hard it is sometimes in industry to kind of have that job security, or do you feel as if it draws an unnecessary eye to it, like, from a public perspective? Because I don't think we have to tell you, of all people, Paul, like, in general, gamers can be pretty uninformed about the development process and what actually happens going into making a game.
No, I think that you just mentioned like people aren't informed enough. I think that articles like Eurogamer or Jason Schreier's, if that's how you pronounce his name, on Kotaku, and all these sort of reporting behind the scenes. I think we need things like that to let people know what is happening behind the scenes, how the games are made, and what really goes into kind of making a product so big and so complex. So if anything, I hope it only drives more conversation about games development, because I think you get a lot of people who think games are dead easy to make, or that you can just go into games development with little to no experience. You see all those sort of CVs come in, they've got an idea for a game, or they've written a story and they think that's enough to get a job. And yeah, I think there's not enough in terms of the education process to make people understand how games are really made. I mean, it's one of the fortunate things. I went to university to study games development, and while it was rough around the edges, of course, because it was one of the first courses in the UK to specialise in games development, it's still, I learned a lot about how games were put together. We had industry experts come into university and tell us a little bit about what happens behind the scenes. And before that point, I had no idea how big budget games got made. I had no insider information or kind of the kind of reality of what happens. And I'm glad these sort of things are being talked about a lot more, because I think it is making people a bit more understanding as to how these massive games get made. And I think the more that can be done about it, the better. And I think it is changing attitudes a little bit. It's going to take time, but I think it is benefiting us as developers that players understand more about what goes into a game.
I think that the gaming media, and from some outlets anyway, is definitely shifting towards a more informed type of content, and that can only be good because ridiculous comments all the time, like, why are you writing about this? Just tell us what games are coming out, and all that comes from like the older way that video games were perhaps viewed. But as we move to be more inclusive and try and understand the process that goes on behind it, I think like Jason's book as well that he brought out recently, and
yes, I've read that.
Yeah, and it's fantastic. Like, it makes you realise just how brutal these things can be, and maybe sometimes as consumers we get a bit too concerned with what we consume rather than the process behind it.
Yeah, I think that comes back to a comment I made earlier about how the games industry is, kind of in its infancy still. I mean, compared to other media forms such as film, which are well established, people understand how films are made, and if anything, films are that they're much better at their art, their craft, at pulling together films, more frequently, more successfully, more on time and to budget, and we're still learning how to to make sure that every single game that we build is kind of delivered on time and to budget. You see how many games get delayed or have issues behind the scenes. It's a very challenging environment to work within, and the problem with our with our scene is that technology is ever evolving. You've heard information just last week about the PlayStation 5 or PlayStation Next or whatever that is, and it's kind of the sand is shifting beneath our feet all the time. So there's always new challenges that lie ahead for us, and they're exciting. Don't get me wrong, because I can't wait for the next generation to come along, because that allows developers to kind of spread their wings a bit more, do things they weren't able to do last generation. But it inevitably means that we've got to learn a lot of things from scratch potentially. There'll be new things to do in these new pieces of hardware that we haven't done before. Generally means more people, more investment, and yeah, it just never stops really in terms of games development. It doesn't get any easier ever.
Well, it's a good time for us to be on the crux of a new generation, because a new start for everyone, and you have recently joined Slightly Mad Studios, which I'm sure our listeners know. The company produces Project Cars, and how long have you been there so far? It's been a pretty short time, right?
Yeah, not been too long. It will have been end of August, beginning of September, that sort of time frame last year. So what's that, about 6 months, 7 months?
Yeah, how are you finding it so far?
Well, it's a very different sort of environment, because obviously I've worked in an office for 15 or so years, working face to face with a team essentially, and we've now got a distributed development platform whereby I'm working at home in my own little office space, and I'm collaborating with 100 plus people from around the world in different time zones to build games, and it's a big shift. It's a very different experience, and it takes a short while to get used to. It's definitely one of those things where it's not something you can just dive into and kind of get on with it straight away. But now I think I'm kind of in the groove, understanding how to communicate differently. It's not the sort of thing where you get up, walk around the office, talk to people. You got to be on Discord, on Skype, on Slack, and all these various communication things to be on video calls, voice calls, text chat, and talking to people all day long in that form. It's a new challenge, but I'm enjoying it. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where there's a lot of benefits that come from working from home as well. It's one of the cool perks of the job, where you've got a lot more flexibility in a day-to-day. I mean, be the parent now as well. Definitely helps with that kind of work-life balance side of things. But yeah, it's been a fun introduction, and exciting times ahead, I think, for the studio.
I think there are certain people that are well suited to work from home, and certain people that aren't. And I know Brenda and I have had some experience freelancing and various jobs where we're working from home, and I think it sounds all rosy and everything, but it is a bit of an acquired taste. You really have to kind of reflect on your workflow and how you communicate with people, to the point where, like, I can do it probably a couple days in a row, but if I've been doing it for too long, I'm like, I really want to go into an office or be able to just walk over to someone's desk and handle this face to face.
I think that there are definitely certain people who gel with it, and other people just won't get along with it, and it's just one of those things. I was fortunate it has gelled with me. I'm quite enjoying it now. And the cool thing is that even though I don't get to speak to the guys face to face every day, there's quite a lot of guys who work at Slightly Mad with me who actually just live around the corner. So once a month we go down to a pub somewhere in the middle, and we all get to meet up and say hello, sort of things. See each other face to face. Obviously not the whole studio, because as I said, all around the world, but there's enough of them who kind of live around this northwest area, working with us at Slightly Mad. That we can all kind of get together on a regular basis, which is awesome.
Sound like it's good fun. I mean, you said yourself it's quite a change, and in terms of Slightly Mad Studios from an outsider's perspective, it definitely seems like they're one of the more ambitious studios in the genre just now in terms of what they want to achieve, because even when you look at the original Project Cars, what they tried to achieve was unprecedented at the time.
Yeah, I think when you look at the guys who are kind of running the studio, Ian Bell, and Andy Gartland, Andy Tudor, and those sort of guys, they're really ambitious, and they want to do new, fresh, and exciting things. So I think whatever you hear from us next, it's always going to be something that will often surprise you. Not necessarily what you expect. So yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I can't talk about certain things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the exciting things about working at Slightly Mad. When you see new announcements and all this kind of discussion and chatter that goes on in the background and what's happening behind the scenes at the studio, it really feels like there's a dozen things happening at any one time, all of which sound like really exciting avenues that we could go down. So yeah, it's definitely a different sort of thing where previous studios never really had so many kind of things going on at once. It was always kind of get your head down on one project most of the time, but here it's cool to have so much kind of I guess creativity and ambition going on behind the scenes. Obviously I'm trying to stay focused on the game that I'm working on, but yeah, it's cool that there's so much going on elsewhere in the studio as well.
Yeah, so speaking of the game you are working on, I'm sure you can't give too many details, but we're all very excited to find out exactly what it is. Anything you could give us? Is it looking similar to maybe certain things from your past, or is it another kind of Onrush, turn the genre upside down type thing?
My lips are sealed in this one, unfortunately. It's definitely something I can't say a word on. All I can say is that I'm having a really great time working on this game. It's one of those games where it's really fun to go into the office, go into my room, and play it every day and see it come along so quickly. I'm really, really pleased with what I'm working on, but I can't say a word about what it is or when we're going to be able to talk about it or anything, unfortunately. It's definitely a case of too early to really talk about it right now.
As long as it's a sequel to Shock's Rally Reinvented, I'll be fine with football.
Shock's Rally. I remember that back in the PS2. That was fun.
Look at the Rushy seal of approval, people. Go buy all the old copies on eBay.
Oh, yeah.
It's a bit of our inside joke here of just Brendan really pushing for that Shock sequel after all these years. But,
was that EA Big, wasn't it, I think?
Yeah, EA Sports Big.
I remember now.
In a way, with all the extreme sports elements, a spiritual successor to Onrush, so ideas really do come full circle. But
so, this is not related to your career path or what you're currently working on. It's just a bit of a fun question, but if you could work on any major racing IP that's active or defunct, what would you choose?
Easy. Ridge Racer.
Oh!
Yeah. I'm a massive fan of Ridge Racer, and I just don't know what happened to it. Obviously, after the glorious Ridge Racer Type 4, it hasn't. I really enjoyed 6 and 7, and the other titles in the series, but I'd love to see it come back and do something fresh and innovative with that series. it's one of those games that I played back in the arcade when I was much, much younger, and it brings back all those memories of the early PlayStation 1 era, and kind of grew up with it in many respects, and it's kind of sad that it's sat there dormant right now. So I'd love to take that game and do something with it.
Yeah, I think I speak for all the Time Extend listeners when I say that we would all very much like to see you work on that franchise, because it could definitely. I mean, it's been dormant for so long now, and it could definitely use a fresh mind behind it, because there's a lot of history there, and it is really one of the progenitors to the modern 3D arcade racer.
Yeah, I don't think you can really talk about racing games and where they originated from without bringing Ridge Racer into that conversation. It's it's a seminal title, which is it's got so much steeped history in this genre in particular. So yeah, it would be a pleasure to do that, but that's one of those dreams that you kind of have, and I would love to do that. I mean, that would be if that came along, I would absolutely snap someone's hand off to get an opportunity to work on Ridge Racer. So you never know. If someone's listening, give me a Ridge Racer.
You should maybe talk some of your colleagues at Slightly Mad, because I think that Project Cars have they cooperated with Namco, who published the game in certain markets, and they had the Ridge Racer liveries on some of the cars, I think, in Project Cars as DLC.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah,
because obviously I do work with Bandai Namco. They work with us as publisher on various titles in the past at Slightly Mad Studio, so we have got a relationship with them. So obviously I'm kind of new to the studio, and haven't really got those relationships in place yet to go and beg someone yet to give me the IP.
It's okay, Paul. We'll beg Namco for you.
Ridge Racer Type 4 is your favourite game of all time then, Rushy? Racing game, would you say?
It's such a challenging one, really, because it's one of those where I've made the mistake of going back to play some of my favourite racing games from previous generations, because I find it's one of those genres that doesn't always hold up quite as well. As like classic 2D platformers just seem to never age, but 3D racing games in particular do seem to age so badly, because Project Gotham Racing, like 1 and 2, fantastic titles, or Metropolis MSR and Dreamcast.
Yep.
Love that racing game. But I, at one point I was a massive retro gamer. I kept all the consoles, and occasionally I'd break out some of the old racing games, and I'd be like, "Ooh, this isn't quite how I remembered it." So I think Ridge Racer Type 4 is one of my favorite racing games of all time. But does it stand up now? I don't know, because I tend to change my favorite game of all time as I play new games, often replacing those in the past. Yes, they have a lot of nostalgia, but I also recognise how games have come on so much in such a short space of time as well. But yeah, that's definitely my favourite in the series of Ridge Racer, no doubt about that.
Well, I've been noticing on Twitter you seem to be enjoying Sekiro a lot, which is really exciting to see your progress through that game and all the excitement. And it makes me think that, like, going back to I think you talked about kind of on the cusp of Onrush, wanting to do something new. Do you see yourself? Are you trying to push to get outside this genre, kind of get a fresh look at things, fresh breath of air, and explore a different aspect, different genre?
That definitely would be a fun challenge at some point in my career to dive into a different genre. And I think there were opportunities for me to go and do something like that, but I still feel like I've got quite a lot to offer within the racing genre. I've still got ideas that I want to see, in racing games that haven't been done before just yet, and I want to kind of, continue to build great racing games, because I know that that's something I can do well. Hopefully everyone agrees with that. And I still feel like I've got more to offer in the genre, and want to passionately still work in racing games, because I don't play as many racing games in my spare time as I used to, because I work on so many. But it's something I'm still passionate to do, to build, to create, which is why you often see on my Twitter feed and stuff like that. I don't tweet about as many racing games as you might expect. because I like to have that kind of that contrast and variety, and I take a lot of inspiration from other games. I'm not sure there's too many ideas I can take from Sekiro, but
being impossibly hard maybe would be one.
It is a challenge. Although it is one of those games where I don't think I'm the best gamer by any means. When I see people do speed runs of bosses and things, it's like, oh, how are they doing that? But I do think Sekiro is one of those games where it's more about your knowledge. Yes, there's skill and there's timing and there is obvious elements like that, but I find that learning how the game works and all these little tricks and intricacies of the game can make life so much easier. Because I was actually thinking, oh, am I gonna have to bang my head at a wall, trying to beat this boss for days on end? And if anything, I haven't kind of hit that brick wall yet. So whenever I've kind of got stuck a little bit, I'll just go and do some research, read up online, watch videos, and listen to the community. And it's amazing what sort of support you can get from people to get yourself through these things. So,
reward you for paying attention.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, I think it's one of the things you get slapped down if you're not paying attention. Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, are we good, Brend, or got anything else?
I don't think I have any more rapid fire questions for you, Paul, so you can rest easy.
That's fine. It's always a bit weird doing the show over over Discord and just being like, where are we? Are we about good to wrap this up? But no, it's such a pleasure having you on, Paul, and obviously we're both very, very excited to see what you do next is Slightly Mad, and we could not thank you enough for being a great enough guest and a cool enough guy to come on our humble little racing game podcast. So thank you.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. No, thanks for inviting me on, and it's always good to reminisce about the past and talk about racing games. So yeah, it's been awesome. No, cheers.
All right, thank you so much, Paul, and thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you again soon.